In 1815 in France, Officer Javert watches a group of prisoners pull huge ropes to move a ship. When it's over, Javert asks prisoner Jean to retrieve the ship's flag. To everyone's shock, Jean shows amazing strength as he lifts the mast and drops it at Javert's feet. Then the officer announces Jean's parole has begun, but he never calls him by his name, he only refers to Jean by his prisoner number. Jean had stolen some bread for his sister's dying baby and was given 5 years for it, but since he kept trying to escape, his sentence became 19. He thinks he's free now, but Javert points out it's just parole and gives him some papers that say so. Jean must always carry those papers and present them when asked. If he fails to report, he'll be arrested again. Afterward, Jean starts wandering, looking for a place to stay. However, nobody will give him a job because of his parole papers, and he's driven out of every town because he's seen as a dangerous man. Even when he tries to sleep in a lowly stable, he's kicked out. Jean tries to sleep inside a church and is found by the bishop, who invites him to have dinner with him and offers him a room. Jean is happy to have a good meal, but after the bishop goes to bed, he steals all the silver he can find and runs away. The next morning, the cops bring Jean back to the church and inform the bishop they caught him with stolen goods. However, the bishop lies to save Jean, saying the objects were a gift and even giving him more candlesticks. After the cops leave, the bishop tells Jean he must use the silver to start a new honest life. Jean is touched by the bishop's kindness and realizes he stole again because that's all he knows, but from now on he'll be a better man under a new identity. He also destroys the parole papers and throws them off a cliff. 8 years later at a factory, the foreman keeps harassing the working women and is particularly handsy with Fantine, so the other women judge her for it. One day the women notice that Fantine has a letter, so they steal it and read it to discover she has an illegitimate daughter named Cosette. A fight ensues when the women try to tell the foreman, but they're interrupted by the arrival of Jean. Under a new name, he's become the owner of this factory and the town's mayor. As he tells everyone to calm down, he's shocked to see Javert at the window, so he lets the foreman finish dealing with the employees. The women call Fantine all kinds of dirty names for having an illegitimate daughter, while Fantine tries to explain she doesn't go around with men, she simply had one boyfriend who left her. The foreman harasses her again, and when Fantine slaps him, she gets fired. Fantine tries to go to Jean for help, but the foreman throws her outside. Meanwhile, Jean thinks he hears something, but he's busy noticing the cops near his factory. Javert is now chief of police and only came to bring some documents. He doesn't recognize Jean, but his face looks familiar. At that moment they hear screaming outside, and Jean runs out to discover that a man got caught under a carriage. Jean uses his strength to rescue the man, and Javert becomes suspicious as he remembers that the prisoner he freed 8 years ago broke his parole and disappeared. Since he lacks proof, he keeps his suspicions to himself for now. That night Fantine starts searching for ways to make money to send to her daughter. First she sells the locket with her daughter's picture, then she sells her hair and even a few teeth. This is still not enough, so she has no choice but to become a naughty worker. Soon living in the streets starts affecting her health. After a few nights of working, a customer gets rather aggressive with her, so Fantine defends herself. The client calls the police and Javert comes to arrest her, but he's interrupted by Jean, who thinks Fantine looks familiar. She calls him out for letting the foreman kick her out and tells him about her daughter, who is very sick. Overwhelmed by guilt, Jean picks her up to take her to the hospital, promising to rescue her daughter as well. Sometime later Javert receives an important letter from Paris informing him that the prisoner he's been looking for has been arrested. Javert goes to see Jean and apologizes for suspecting him, claiming that he deserves to be punished. However, Jean forgives him, saying Javert was only doing his job. The rest of the day Jean is haunted by the thoughts of an innocent man being arrested in his place, and in the evening he decides to reveal his identity to the court, mentioning his prisoner number as proof. Nobody believes him, so Jean tells them to ask Javert before he's kicked out. Afterward Jean goes to the hospital to check on Fantine, whose fever is causing her to see hallucinations of her daughter. Jean tells her she'll take good care of the child and give her a good life, so Fantine finds peace and finally dies. At that moment Javert shows up to arrest Jean, who refuses to surrender and grabs a piece of wood to defend himself against Javert's sword. Unfortunately, Jean can't do much against a properly trained cop and gets unarmed, so he decides to escape by jumping into the river. Meanwhile, Fantine's daughter Cosette is living in the local inn under the care of the owners Monsieur and Madame Thénardier. She isn't actually sick, the Thénardiers are keeping her as their maid and wrote lies to Fantine to make her send more money. The couple is incredibly cruel and mistreats Cosette while treating their own daughter like a little angel. The Thénardiers also like to keep their clients drunk and distracted to steal all their valuables. The food they cook for the inn is made with suspicious ingredients, including street cats. That night Jean goes to the inn and informs Cosette that her mother is dead, so she should go with him. The Thénardiers refuse to let the kid go, pretending they love her like a daughter and that they spent too much money on her medicine. Jean agrees to pay Fantine's debt and some extra money on top of that until the Thénardiers allow Cosette to leave with him. After Jean and the girl are gone, Javert shows up looking for them, and the Thénardiers realize they could have bribed Jean for much more money for helping a criminal. Moments later Jean and Cosette's carriage is stopped at the city gates, where cops are asking for paperwork. The duo immediately runs away while Javert chases them through the streets, repeating Jean's prisoner number. Jean manages to find some rope and uses it to climb on top of a very tall wall, bringing Cosette along. They hide in there until Javert gives up and leaves. Then Jean and Cosette sneak inside a church, where they're seen by a man. At first Jean thinks it's over, but it turns out this man is the guy he saved from the carriage accident and he agrees to help them find sanctuary. Jean hopes to disappear and start over somewhere else. 9 years later in Paris, poverty is increasing at an alarming speed. There's a clear tension in the streets as the poor people complain about the current king, remembering that they killed the last one when things got bad. Young students form a group called Friend of the ABC and are already making plans to start a revolution against the monarchy, regularly going to the streets to spread their message and get people's support. One of these revolutionaries is Marius, who comes from a good family but he's now considered a disgrace and lives in a humble rented room. He's best friends with the Thénardier's daughter Éponine, but he doesn't notice that she clearly has a crush on him. One afternoon Marius sees Jean and an older Cosette helping out the poor and he instantly falls in love with her. The Thénardiers, who now live in the streets, also see them and immediately recognize them. Wanting to get more money out of Jean, the Thénardiers and some hobo friends surround him so Jean tries to defend himself. Hearing the commotion, Javert and his cops show up to stop the fight. While Javert is too busy scolding the bums, Jean runs away with Cosette, who locks eyes with Marius on her way out. Monsieur Thénardier tells Javert who the man was and now Javert is obsessed with finding him again. After the cops are gone, Marius asks Éponine to find out where Cosette lives. That night the ABCs gather at a cafe to make plans and Marius can't stop thinking about Cosette. The other men tease him with good humor but Enjolras scolds him for not thinking about more important things like their mission. Soon news arrive announcing that the only government official who cared about the poor died. The group gets ready to go out and fight, but Éponine shows up with Cosette's address and Marius goes to see her instead. In the meantime Cosette can't stop thinking about the handsome man she saw earlier. She always feels lonely because Jean has never let her socialize to protect her identity. Cosette wants Jean to share the secrets he keeps behind their isolation but he refuses. After a short argument, Cosette goes to the garden and finds Marius at the gate. They confess their love for each other while Éponine watches them from afar with a broken heart. The moment is interrupted by Jean, who orders Cosette to get back inside while Marius hides. Before leaving, Marius grabs the handkerchief Cosette dropped on the grass. At that moment Monsieur Thénardier arrives with his gang ready to catch Jean to get a reward from Javert. Éponine screams to warn Cosette and Jean, then she spits on her father's face and Thénardier slaps her in return. A cop comes closer to check on all the noise so the gang has no choice but to run away. Jean also hears all the ruckus and thinks it's Javert, so he announces they'll be escaping to England. Cosette tries to make him change his mind but he refuses, so she leaves a note at the gate for Marius explaining the situation. Éponine finds the note and after lots of internal struggle regarding her own feelings, she hides the letter and only tells her friend that Cosette has disappeared. A desperate Marius runs to Cosette's house but by the time he gets there, she and Jean are already gone. He considers searching for her, but he remembers the ABC's fight and chooses to stay to help. At the same time Éponine dresses up as a boy to join the revolution too. While the rebels get their weapons ready, Enjolras goes out to convince the locals to revolt. The next day Enjolras and Marius crash the funeral procession as they sing and wave the flags of revolution. Soon the crowd is following them, singing along as they ask for a better France. Javert is in this crowd, pretending to be a rebel to spy on them. The royal soldiers arrive to block the way and open fire, killing an old lady. A fight ensues and the soldiers begin killing rebels with both their swords while the crowd does their best to defend themselves. The ABCs guide the crowd to start building barricades using the furniture civilians are throwing out their windows. Everyone runs around town gathering more objects to defend themselves, finding support at every corner. Enjolras points out someone should sneak around to find out what the enemy is planning, so Javert volunteers while still pretending he's on the rebel side. By nighttime, the barricade is effectively blocking the main road. Javert comes back and tries to share fake information, but Gavroche recognizes him and tells everyone who he really is. The rebels immediately capture Javert, who tries to defend himself and brings a few men down before Enjolras knocks him out. At that moment the soldiers show up and open fire, starting a new battle. Both sides begin losing men pretty quickly as the street becomes a battlefield. Marius runs ahead with a barrel of gunpowder and doesn't see the soldier about to shoot him, so Éponine jumps in to protect him and gets killed instead. When Marius threatens to blow up the barrel, the soldiers leave in fear. Afterward Marius checks on Éponine, who gives him Cosette's letter before dying in his arms. Then Marius writes a letter for Cosette and makes Gavroche deliver it, but it's Jean who receives him at the door. He reads the letter and is moved by Marius' feelings, so he runs to the barricade to protect his daughter's beloved. Jean dresses up as a soldier so he can walk without suspicion, but when the rebel sees him they think he's another spy. While Jean notices Javert tied up nearby, Gavroche comes to his defense. At that moment an enemy sniper appears on the roof and Jean yells a warning before he helps the rebels shoot him down. Now that everyone believes him, Jean asks them to let him execute Javert. Enjolras gives him permission, but once they're alone, Jean releases Javert and assures him he wants nothing in return except for proving he's a good man. Javert runs away while Jean shoots in the air to pretend he did kill him. The next morning Marius discovers that the rain damaged the gunpowder and they don't have much ammunition left. To make matters worse, civilians have gone home and only the ABC men are left. However, they refuse to surrender and take their position on the barricade to fight until the very end. Gavroche is eager to help and goes around picking up ammo from fallen bodies, only to be shot multiple times by the soldiers. Jean picks up the boy's body before the ABCs open fire, hungry for revenge. A new battle begins, and this time the soldiers use cannons to easily get the upper hand. One by one the rebels are killed, and the people in their homes refuse to open the doors for those trying to save themselves. Marius is knocked down, so Jean runs to pick his body up to then sneak around and escape through the sewers. Enjolras and the last rebels manage to enter an abandoned building, but the soldiers surround them and quickly kill them too. As a revolution symbol, Enjolras raises the flag and dies with it still in his hands. Moments later, while the soldiers are cleaning up, Javert puts his medal on Gavroche's body. He also notices Jean isn't among the bodies and hears some noises coming from the sewers. Jean is trying to move Marius' body without being noticed, but he slips and they both fall on a pile of excrement. There they are found by Monsieur Thénardier, who steals Marius' ring. Jean jumps on him and threatens to drown him until Thénardier tells him how to get out. Carrying Marius on his shoulder, Jean walks through several tunnels until he finally leaves the sewer. Unfortunately, Javert is waiting for him at the exit. Jean asks him for just 1 hour to drop Marius at the hospital, promising he'll turn himself in afterward, yet Javert still threatens to kill him if he moves. Noticing that Javert is having doubts about his own morals, Jean continues walking with Marius' body and Javert never stops him. Not knowing anymore who is good and who is bad, Javert decides to self-delete by jumping into the river. Sometime later Marius wakes up in his grandfather's house without knowing who rescued him. When he hears what happened to his friends, he returns to their headquarters to grieve. There he's found by Cosette, who comforts him and promises to take care of him. Jean watches them from afar and realizes that his presence will only bring more trouble. Later in private, Jean gives Marius his blessing to marry Cosette and shares his past before announcing he must leave to protect them. Marius understands and promises not to tell Cosette the truth. Eventually Marius and Cosette get married, although Cosette is sad that Jean isn't there with her. The Thénardiers try to crash the wedding wearing disguises, but Marius recognizes them. Before they can be kicked out, the Thénardiers tell Marius that they saw his father-in-law carrying a murdered body through the sewers and they want money in exchange for keeping the secret. They even present the stolen ring as proof, making Marius realize that it was Jean who saved him. He punches Monsieur Thénardier until he confesses Jean is hiding at the convent, then the Thénardiers are dragged out of the party. That night Marius and Cosette visit Jean, who is on the verge of death and keeps seeing Fantine's spirit. Jean is glad to see his daughter one last time and gives her a letter sharing all his past before he finally dies in peace. While Cosette has a breakdown, Jean's spirit joins all the dead characters on the street singing for their beloved France. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.